Hey, Adeline,
Yes,
just quick question.
sure.
Do you hear or see much of Ian?
I personally haven't heard from him. The last I heard, he was happily working at Department of Transportation. But beyond that, I personally haven't heard from him. I don't know if any of my colleagues here have. But last I heard, he was doing well.
Oh, good. Very good. I haven't heard from him. I sent him a text, but I don't know what number to text because I had 3 or 4 different numbers for him. So my
Sure.
luck, it was the wrong one.
But yeah, last I heard, he was doing well.
Okay.
All right. With that, it's 1 o'clock. So welcome back. I do want to just note real quick, make sure we have our GRC members back here. I think everyone is back. Looking. I think so. I think we have everyone. Perfect. All right, there we go. Now I see you all. Welcome back. Okay, so a couple things before we get back into it. First and foremost, GRC members, this is taking a little bit. We're still pretty not very far into adult drug courts. So I just want to make sure that all of you, if needed, will be able to attend tomorrow's meeting as well. If you can just give me I can't see all of you. I just want to make sure we will need at least a minimum of 5 of you. So I'm seeing 3. Joe, are you able to attend tomorrow? I can't.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And Kelsey, are you able to attend tomorrow? We're looking for Kelsey and Annie. I think everyone else I can see.
Yes, I said I'm planning to be relevant tomorrow.
Perfect. So fingers crossed. I mean, there's still hope we can get us back, but I do want to make sure that we can hit quorum if we need to meet tomorrow. So that's the first and foremost. Secondly, I just want to, before we get back in here, I want to do a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, saying that, again, because we have so many courts to get through, this is a big chunk. I want to just remind us to make sure that we are staying on task and really focused on the application itself. So focusing on each court, not the county, right? And then making sure as well that we're really going by the information that was given us. We don't want to, while your context is also always appreciated and helpful, what we don't want to do is be making some inequitable decisions because you don't happen to have knowledge about something outside of a treatment court, a specific county where you do have knowledge about the other counties. So just making sure that we're really trying to stick to the information that was provided to us in these applications. Or of course, if you need staff to, we can go back into previous, but hopefully we're just like really focusing on the information that they gave us in each of these. The other thing, so we've been having, as we've been going, kind of some conversations and then have moved a couple courts that we want to consider down the road. That's fine, but I just do want to clarify that if and when you all do want to make a recommendation, that is great, but you need to tell me exactly what that recommendation is and why you're doing it. So it needs to be tied to either one of the staff methodologies that I've given you today, or if you want to say tie it to something specific like participants or FTE or something measurable, we need to make sure that we're tying it to those. So if you make a recommendation of a reduction, obviously, then that needs to be tied to something. It can't just because you feel like it or that's the vibe, right? We need something that we can measure it by. So just not saying that hasn't been done, but just wanting to give a reminder to everyone. And then finally, before we get in there, go ahead, Jake.
No, go ahead.
I just want to apologize because honestly, right before we left, I flubbed an explanation pretty hard. So I want to reverse back and kind of go over the scaled caps again. So if you'll bear with me, I want to clarify. So initially, we went through every single court, every single application, and we brought them down right to that original cap. And then we brought them down to our first scaled cap using the prioritization sheet. And then after everyone was at their scaled cap, what we did was then we did staff cuts on top of that. So that was right sizing the budgets, right, based on spending, going to where we didn't have information. Maybe we tied it, all those lists of line items that we had given you earlier in the presentation. That's how we did the staff cuts. Now, what resulted was we had a really significant reduction of funds. And so we had additional funds that we needed to distribute. So what we did was we scaled back up for all courts that had those scaled caps. So we went through every single one of those, again, for all courts, and then adjusted up to that slightly higher scaled cap. So I just want to be really clear that A, this was for all courts, and B, we didn't undo any staff reductions that were based on something other than their prioritization sheet, right? We didn't undo anything that we said wasn't an appropriate ask for the court. Hopefully that clarifies some things. Jake, go ahead.
So going back, I don't want to go backwards too long, but is it appropriate to make a recommendation for provisional funding for year one? We'll take a look at year two to see.
So we can, so I did ask, we can do provisional funding recommendations. However, if you choose to do that, it has to be tied to a standard. So there has to be like a specific reason. It can't be tied to spending. It needs to be tied to, we're worried about it and we want to reduce it to a number of participants. And if you have more participants than that, you can increase or something like that. It can't just be based on spending. I do think that what I was describing before we left for the break about that spending up to at least 60% by Q7, and then we'll hold the final distributions if we need to. I think that will get to it if you were thinking of a provisional based on spending.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Of course. Judge Kitson-McCaddish. Sorry, I just call you Judge. I hope that's appropriate.
That's okay, totally okay. So Adeline, thank you. I appreciate you taking extra time to clarify. I guess my question would be, because I didn't understand that in the beginning, who does it benefit a court one way or another by setting a cap and then adjusting it back in?
No, so again, this was really about like keeping it equitable. So it doesn't benefit anyone. It should affect everyone if they had a scaled cap. Now, some courts don't have a scaled cap, right? Especially if they requested under the scaled cap, then they were unaffected completely. But there were 32 total that we had scaled caps on. All of those are affected equally because we didn't undo any staff recommended reductions. The only thing that we potentially did was refunded up to that scaled cap.
So just to test my knowledge, a scaled cap, that had to do with if you didn't spend your money, right?
Correct.
So those courts that failed to spend their budget didn't, in essence, may not have received a cap because of it.
No, they would have. So that was the whole point of the scaled cap. So if you didn't spend your funds at an appropriate level, then we're saying you only get a certain percentage of that initial cap.
But then when the reductions for failure to put it in your narration or to justify it in your application, then it kind of does away with it. I don't think I'm being real clear on that.
No, because those, if we as staff reduce something, so for example, there were a couple line items, right, that we reduced because there wasn't enough information. So we as staff said, we recommend reducing this line by 20% because we didn't have enough information. We couldn't figure it out, right? That 20% reduction stands. That was not changed at all. The only thing that was increased is if they were scaled down to their scaled cap by their prioritization sheet.
So if I'm a court, I'm just thinking out loud, and I know you guys want to move forward, and so maybe I need to do this thinking offline, but if I'm a court that, say I didn't spend, give me an example, well, I'll do some thinking on this, because there will be an instance where a court had a scaled cap, and then they were also reduced after that scaled cap.
Yes,
Correct?
absolutely. There were several.
So those courts are somewhat penalized than a larger court, maybe, that they're not. You don't think so?
No. Let me bring you back to this because I think this
Yeah.
might be helpful. Okay, so here's our scaled cap breakdown. And I'll give you all a little peek behind the curtain and kind of why I think this might be helpful. Originally, for that yellow group that we have, or on the yellow line, right? So we're saying that their scaled cap is 90% of that initial cap, right? So originally, we had that number closer to 85%. But when we went and did all these reductions, we realized we had a sizable amount left. We know courts need funded, right? So we brought that scaled cap up to 90%. And when we did that, we returned funds based on their prioritization sheet. So if you have a court that, say, didn't describe their housing, right? And so we cut their housing request of $10,000, we cut it by 20% because they didn't describe it, they still did not get that 20% back. What they got back were other areas that were cut down based on their prioritization sheet, based on reductions due to that scale.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions before we kind of continue on with Wallowa? And bear with me here, because as you all can see, this is a really long presentation, so it's hard to get back to our slides. All right, so here's, of course, your GIC feedback that you gave them last time. They did note in their response to feedback, increased staff capacity with a new coordinator and a new treatment court staff member. They also noted they'll update policies and procedures as needed to implement any changes to potential participant eligibility as recommended by their steering committee. They will continue the consistent use and tracking of validated risk and need tools. They'll collect and enter additional validated assessments. They're going to evaluate the use of jail as a sanction and will continue to be diligent in not using it for treatment purposes. And the judge will continue spending at least 3 minutes with each participant. Their average was 5.7 minutes. And the staff will support the steering committee in standing up an advisory committee and creating more formal onboarding process for new hires. And this is another court too, I want to note that noted the negative impact of that insufficient number of public defense attorneys. When you all are ready, we'll move to their recommended funding. Excellent. So their average participation was 13 with a completion rate of 75%, and their spending is at 78%. Now, they did not have any additional cuts, so I have no other additional information. Staff recommendation is to fully fund this court to their scale cap.
I support that, the recommendation.
All right. I saw a thumbs up and a support, so we'll move to our next court. This is the Wasco and Hood Counties Adult Drug Court. As I said I would, this is our first brand new court that we're seeing so far this far. They have requested in their feedback, they've requested the best practices training from OSCA for their court team. They have also connected with OSCA for recommendations regarding recovery capital assessment tools. And in their feedback, they clarified their jail sanctions and that they only use jail in extreme circumstances and as a last resort. And if it is imposed, the goal is that it is swift, certain, and short. All right, so again, this court did not have a scaled cap because they were brand new. The only cuts we recommended as staff were in housing, and that was the cleaning supplies, first aid, and basic household necessities. They were cut as they weren't directly tied to individual participants. So it was kind of just a general ask instead of a percentage based on participants. Now, I do want to note that they have an average participation of 16 and a completion rate of 58%. Joe.
So just a quick question. I know we're only supposed to be considering things that are actually in the application. This application just stood out to me because it didn't really request any personnel cost except for looks like some clerical staff and UA tech stuff. So I know it's a startup. So do they have like a startup grant or something, or some supplemental funding that's covering other things, just so that would help provide some context to it?
Yeah, so I mean, again, we kind of want to focus on what they're asking for. But yes, they are an existing treatment court that has other funding sources.
Thank you.
They're just new to our grant, I think is a better way to put that. With that, do you have any additional recommendations for this court? Yeah, Annie.
Nope, I meant to do the thumbs up. I think this is good to go.
Okay,
Follow the
perfect.
recommendation.
That's all right. All right. Next up, we have Crook County Adult Drug Court. And let me double check here. I don't have any additional notes in the narrative here. But also, I'm going to be fully transparent. My computer is kind of freezing. So if you all can see that and you have different information, by all means, let me know.
My notes say that this one was the narrative. They provided more of the narrative in the budget expense sheet and not in the narrative form.
Thank you so much. Nothing like, technology dying in the middle of a very important presentation. Right. So for Crook ADC, their average participation was 15. They had a completion rate of 67%, and their spending was at 61%.
So on this one, my notes, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, but with Crook, I wondered if they had used actual court time in the way that they should. Do they have a dedicated docket?
I do not know the answer to that question.
I was also looking at the training. It looks like the recommended is below the 12,000 that it was capped at. Can you explain why?
So they were actually allowed their overage in training and travel. This is a court that did a really great job of explaining why they needed additional funds. However, it was reduced based on their prioritization sheet. And they do have a dedicated docket. So if you're ready, I can pop over to that additional information if that would be helpful.
I hate to ask, I'm just trying to understand on this one where with the training of 12,000 and they had a scaled cap, would this court not be added? I mean, wouldn't they be able to exceed that?
So yeah, so they were originally, right, when staff went through their recommendations, right? So we looked at, we went to their initial cap, and then we went to their scaled cap. And the reason why we cut training and travel was because that is what they prioritized, prioritized reductions, I guess. If they had to have a reduction, they said in training and travel. So we as staff, if it wasn't to their scaled cap, we would have said 100%, that's fine. That was based on their recommendation, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I can, if you don't mind, I'll walk through kind of some of the more notable ones on this. So staff recommends removing the best care treatment services director or supervisor, because the supervisor doesn't need to be at staffing, the provider should be, which we did recommend funding for. Another notable reduction here that we recommended was to the cell phone for the program coordinator. This is something that's typically provided by OJD because they're providing for the coordinator. So we didn't feel that it needed to be provided by CJC. And then we did reduce their incentives by 20% as it didn't explain kind of what incentives they would be purchasing or really any type of breakdown. Everything else that you're seeing here, besides those that I just noted, was reduced based on their prioritization sheet. All right, so with that, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Do you have any additional recommendations for this court? Okay. All right. Joe, with nothing but respect, we're going to ask you to head on out for this one. Perfect. All right, so this is Douglas County Adult Drug Court. In response to their feedback, they discussed an interesting program that they've created called the Friends of Treatment Court. They created this in part with Douglas County, and that facilitates incentive donations that are too large for or outside the scope of the CJC grant program. So they're using this to fund other incentives. They also clarify that jail is not used for treatment purposes and that they place a strong emphasis on positive reinforcement. They're continuing to work with providers to address delays in receiving UA results. They clarified that they are tracking recidivism through an internal database to guide continuous improvement efforts. And they did clarify that their policy committee is meeting monthly. So their average participation was 56. Their completion rate is 53%, and their spending is at 81%.
I'm ready. Is there more information on this one?
There is. Perfect. So the case manager line, staff recommended a reduction of 20% due to confusion around how much time the case manager is spending with participants. The narrative description had 26 hours per participant per week, which isn't feasible. And it was kind of also unclear about how the case manager role was different than the court coordinator. And similarly, housing was reduced by 20% due to the lack of explanation of breakdown of how the funds would be used. They just asked for one unit of 18,000 and didn't really break it down any further.
I also had a concern on the SEAMS, the non-billable counselor time seemed like a lot.
Okay. With that, do you want to make a recommendation based on that?
No, I don't know if anybody else felt that way or not, or maybe I missed something. But you may have taken care of it with the 20%. I know that's a little bit different than the case manager. Will you go back to the other slide where it
I
shows
can.
the amount?
Of course. So looking at it, do we have any additional recommendations? All right, got a couple thumbs up. All right, next up we have Jefferson County Adult Drug Court. Also, Joe, welcome back. In their response to your GRC feedback, they noted limited staffing and docket time, making it really difficult to increase the frequency of staffing and hearings. They did want to note that they've extended an invitation to law enforcement to join them at staffing, but haven't been able to have anyone with law enforcement attend due to staffing shortages. They do utilize the RANT to determine risk and need, and the ASAM to assess recommended level of dosage. They'll continue to review eligibility criteria. They are working at increasing the documentation of incentives in SCMS and looking to increase incentive options. They're also working with providers to increase both the amount and timeliness of data entry. They have decreased the number of jail sanctions given, and they're looking at alternative sanction options, and they're working to decrease the average number of jail days. They are having more participants who have been released from custody attend outpatient, which is resulting in increased UA check-ins and or being placed on electronic monitoring instead of staying in custody. They did clarify their judge spends at least 3 minutes with each participant, and they are in the initial stage of standing up an advisory committee. Now, they are another court that noted that UAs are sent out of state for confirmation, and results usually take an average of 72 hours to be returned, which is why they aren't being entered into SCMS within 48 hours. We've had a couple courts in that position that noted that. So we're ready. I'll pop on over to this one. Their average participation is 19 with a 59% completion rate, and they are at 60% spending. Now, I do want to note that staff recommended reducing both the substance use disorder clinician and recovery mentor, just due to a lack of description about how funds were being used. We kind of needed more than just a monthly rate. We didn't know how much they were per hour, how many hours per month, etc. So we needed a little more information on that one.
So I have question on
Mhm.
this one. So they're specifically saying that they served 16 people, right, last time on average? And
Yes,
then
their average
recommend-
participation was 19.
Okay, 19. And so then they're requesting 25 this time. So when I'm looking at these, when I'm looking at the anticipated average participants in the coming biennium, it's saying 25 in each of these categories related to treatment or peer services. And then they're calculating the request of funding based on the average population they're serving. But then the narrative is saying it's for services not covered by the Oregon Health Plan. You kind of see what I'm saying? Like, I don't,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense to me. Like, it seems like you would say on average, I have 1.5 of my 25 who don't have some kind of coverage or something, and therefore I'm requesting, X. Not that I'm requesting X for all 25 people, right? That's
Mhm.
so I'm not really certain how to support that.
So I will note that staff, I think, had some similar questions to what you're outlining, which is why that fell within that reduction of 20%, basically because we didn't have enough information to follow up. So you can stick with that, or if you'd like to make a recommendation to make further reductions, we'll just need to know how you would like those reductions made.
Well, this is maybe it's just me, but this one kind of puts me in a tough spot because the way it's written and not being able to ask any additional information, or I guess I would be voting, if I voted in favor of it, I'd be voting to support the funding for 25 participants. I get it's with the reduction, but what they're saying is that they're requesting funding for all of their participants on average monthly that they're serving. And if you're also accessing the Oregon Health Plan for a number of these folks, then that creates kind of a legal issue. That's a double billing issue and so if you can't ask additional questions related to that, it at least puts me in a difficult position to support this at all without that clarification. And so I don't know where I'm at the second, but I just wanted to put that out there of why this is challenging, because this is saying we're requesting funding for, on average, all of the people who are in our program, and we're saying it's for uninsured folks. And I just don't know how that's possible. So.
Sure. Real quick, I do want to note, Joe, that if you're kind of feeling that way, we appreciate the feedback. Just a reminder that you're not voting. We're just making recommendations. So if you're saying, hey, I don't know what to do with this, and you want to abstain, that is absolutely a very reasonable response as well. We just kind of have to come to a consensus. So Connie, I saw your hand go up and then it went down. I want to make sure we weren't missing you. Is that okay? Did you have a question?
Just tagging on to what he was saying, the way I'm reading it, they're requesting funding for all 25, and I would make a recommendation that amount be lowered to a more reasonable number of uninsured participants.
Okay. Judge, do you want to add some more to that, or do you want to agree with that? How would you like to move forward with this? Or
I just want to clarify, because I'm looking at it and I think it says the requested funds will be used for treatment services not covered by private insurance or the Oregon Health Plan. And then such services include best care clinician time that is spent attending staff meetings, quick turnaround SUD assessments, court hearings, and additional meetings such as policy advisor meetings. If that's the one we're reading, the way that I take that is that a treatment practitioner cannot bill for court time, whether you're insured or not. They cannot bill for court time. They cannot bill for I don't know what all I read, but there's certain things that they cannot bill for. And they attend and appear regardless whether the person is insured or not. And so I think it's a little different than people not having insurance. And so for all their participants, if their average amount is, you said 19, then
Mhm.
maybe we reduce it a little bit, but it wouldn't be, every participant, I assume they're doing court staffing, if I'm reading it right.
So what I'm hearing and what we need from you all as a group is, I'm hearing some like, it actually kind of makes sense. This is how we read it, right? We only have the information that we have. And I'm hearing some folks say we want to reduce it. So we need a consensus on A, if you want to reduce it or not. And B, if you do want to reduce it, tell me what number you want it reduced to. And how we're going to get there. So whether it's by a percentage, whether it's by people, we'll need some sort of number. Go ahead, Connie.
I was just thinking, if this is by a clinician and it's being used to staff the client, then it's a billable service.
Not for treatment court. Like, I mean, I could be totally wrong. I'm not a clinician, but I don't think our providers that come to court staffing bill for that time at staffing or for our trainings that they attend. Or for going to RISE, those sorts of things. I think there's additional things they do that they don't get to bill for.
But in their description, it talks about staffing, SUD assessments, court hearings. If it's working with community partners for staffing the client, that would still be a billable service. The staff, the meetings and advisory committee and all of that wouldn't be billable, but if you're staffing the client and making a plan, that should be.
I'm wondering if you don't mind if we can let Rachel Mark pop in and see if she has any information on this.
Thank you. Connie, thank you for flagging that. I think I would point out just a few things. One is every provider and kind of area working with their CCOs, I think, have different experiences and interpretations. So what might work in one community may not always work in another based off of whether it's not using the right wording and coding to get it approved by the CCO. I think there's just potentially some discrepancies across the state and what is paid for versus not under that billable umbrella. I would also flag that if there are participants who are for some reason not able to get health insurance, that would be a non-issue for those folks. Of course, all services going towards them would need to be funded elsewhere since they're not getting any type of insurance coverage. But I do think what you're pointing out is very real, and hopefully something as a state we can look at so that there is some continuity in making sure these types of services that potentially could be billed are going to the right places rather than out of the grant program. But as of now, there's a great variance throughout the state on that.
Jake, go ahead.
And without having the full scope of things, some of the things that those therapists or contracted folks are doing could be the same as here. They got short staff, so in order to have dedicated staff, they're having to buy part of their time to make sure that they attend. I mean, I think 115,000 is way out there, but without having all the information, be able to ask somebody from Jefferson County about that specific, I think that is high, and what was their participant level?
19 was their average participation.
18?
19.
No, 19. Yeah, that could be seen as high. And how often do they meet for their courts? Is it weekly or bi-weekly?
That's a great question. I don't know if we have that information.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. So I hate to be a broken record, but I'm going to be. So if we're going to make a reduction, or if you all are going to recommend a reduction, then we are going to need a number. Now, I did have a note. We're double checking, but we're pretty sure they're meeting bi-weekly. that helps make the decision. But we will need some sort of direction if you are going to recommend a reduction in funding, or you can stick with the staff methodology that was that 20% reduction based on a lack of information.
I would throw something out there based on what you guys have discussed. If you wanted to reduce it more, a logical amount would be going from at least to 20 rather than 25. So whatever that percent is.
So finding the number of going from 25 participants to 20 participants?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joe, do you have any ideas?
So I do want to, and again, not to fight back or anything, just giving information. 20 is 80% of 25. So that is where they sit right now. So staff has a very similar recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is always tough because I think if I keep reading this through, I mean, I get some of the points they're making. And again, I don't know who exactly wrote this, so it's just difficult to read into everything. So let me ask kind of a broader question. So when the CJC does make final recommendations based on this group to the commission decides, what direction do the staff receive to follow up on anything for clarification around some of these things, if any?
No, so this is typically no. We are limited capacity, and so going back and getting additional information, especially, it is such a tight turnaround to get funds out.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying to get more information, but to provide direction.
Oh, typically what's happened, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat to see if anyone wants to add anything else. But typically what happens is a staff member such as myself would bring your recommendations to the commission. And typically they might ask questions based on, hey, this court seems like they were reduced quite a bit, why, or this court isn't, kind of get a little detail. But typically they're kind of going by the fact that you all are experts in this field. And so if you've made the recommendation, then they're typically not going to go too far beyond it. Now, I can't say that for sure, right? Ultimately, now I'm knocking on wood. I don't want to don't want to break that trend, but typically that is how it goes. I do, real quick, before we get too far off, I do want to note that we have confirmed that court hearings are twice a month.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I have many other ideas other than yours, Judge. I think I can support that moving forward, but I do think I don't know, maybe it's something larger that's going to have to be a different conversation past all of this that, with CJC staff, just to try to sort some of the stuff out. I mean, it's always an issue, right? You have changes and folks are writing in different things, and we'd like to think everyone, is dialed in on all sides, including ours when we're reviewing them. And so, but yeah, I think just some of the wording and things like quick turnaround for, assessments and stuff. It's like, well, either you're doing assessments or not. Doing quick turnaround for assessments is part of, just being a treatment court. And so you're asking for funding for something that's already supposed to be part of the standards to do stuff and as a billable service. And so, yeah, I don't have another solution other than yours, Judge, so I could get behind that.
So I do want to make a clarification. Currently, it sits at the recommendation from staff at 80%. Is that the recommendation you want to go with, or were you saying an additional 20% from that?
I was not saying an additional 20%. I was saying that would be a way to calculate it, and it came out the same way as staff. I'm not sure if Joe knew that or he was seeking an additional reduction.
Yep. That was my understanding.
Okay, so just to clarify, so that I'm not, everyone's on the same page. We are saying continue with staff recommendations as noted here. All right. All right, I got a thumbs up. That's all I need. All right. Next up, we have Washington County Adult Drug Court. They made a point to note that they're working really hard on moving their program towards sustainability. So there is a proportion of CJC grant funding needed to operate Washington ADC, and that has decreased by 54% over the last 3 funding cycles. So, and they're going to continue to investigate alternative funding sources. So they're really recognizing, I think as we all are, that this grant can't fully fund everyone. And so they're really looking for alternative means of funding. Now, a couple notes based on your GRC feedback. They plan to increase attendance at staffing. And they're also going to adjust their incentive to sanction ratio to meet to that 4-to-1 recommendation. They also plan to broaden their incentive options. They plan to decrease the average number of days used for jail sanctions. And they did clarify that currently they do not use jail for treatment. They did clarify the judge spends an average of 6.3 minutes with each participant, and they are planning on establishing an advisory committee by the end of this biennium, or excuse me, in the next biennium. So 25 to 27, they will establish an advisory committee. All right. So they have an average participation of 22. Their completion rate is 65%, and their spending is at 66%. So staff did recommend a reduction of 20% to both their mental health clinician and to Solutions Northwest, again, to not really understanding the breakdown of how that cost per month was calculated. We were unsure of the rate per participant. So we recommended that 20%, and then the mental health clinician was further reduced due to following their prioritization sheet.
I have no idea why. I was trying to look at my notes, but I really liked theirs when I read through it, and I thought that they did a good job. So I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't put that in my notes, but I'll go back and look at it. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Well, it's probably nice for them to hear it regardless. Do you all have any additional recommendations for this court, besides letting them know they did a great job?
I don't know if I want to cut the mental expertise on mental health. I don't know if that's why I thought that they did a good job or not.
So I apologize, you cut out just a little bit there. Are you recommending recommending increasing funding?
Yeah, so they're only asking for 115. What did you have them down as? That you're funding
The
them?
percentage?
Yeah, 103.
So if you are recommending funding more, they are funded up to their scaled cap. So if you are recommending increasing that, you would be recommending going over the scaled cap.
I guess it's because also your statement that they've been reducing they're very financially responsible if they continue to reduce their own funding. And then they are seeking supports outside of CJC as well. So yeah, I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I'm going to take a second and go back and look at that. I didn't take great notes.
Okay, and I do just want to offer a friendly reminder that if, similar to if the same conversation we had around Jefferson about recommendations of reductions. If you are recommending doing an increase, especially if it's going over that scaled cap, we will need a very clear explanation as to why. So we will need something to tie it to directly.
Can you remind me, you said the cuts here were based on their prioritization as well?
So contractual services, let me go to the next one. Both our mental health clinician and Solutions Northwest, we initially reduced to 80%, so reduced by that 20% due to a lack of explanation of the breakdown of how that cost per month was calculated. We were unsure of what rate was per participant. And then the mental health clinician was further reduced due to their prioritization sheet.
It does state in their narrative that they expect 80 to 90% of the ARC participants are going to need those mental health services.
I don't know, maybe my bias is the smaller courts. I'm sorry, I don't know, because I just see that small amount that they're really asking for. And yeah, so I guess I'm going to recommend that for the services that that the 50,000 be allowed at least at a 90% level.
Okay, so that we can definitely make that recommendation, but again, a reminder that we'll need to know why you want to go over that scaled cap, or the other option is we can recommend filling that those contractual services at that full 50,000 marker and reducing other categories to get to that scaled cap.
Well, I would say that the cap comes with, you find yourself in a different bracket when you ask for moderate or modest amounts because you're capped at 5% over. And so if you're a very large court, you get to have a large budget, but if you're the very small court, you're capped with 5%. And then the sealed cap, you said that has to do with the percent that they spent, right? And they are at a 66 for what they spent. So I guess my case would be that this is a small court that utilizes their funds wisely, and their requests across the board are pretty, I mean, they're only even asking for training in the amount of 6,000 when they're capped at 12.
So I do want to just be really clear. Those initial caps and scaled caps are all tied to spending. They are not in any way tied to the size of the court. They are tied to what they were awarded in a so that initial cap, right? What they were awarded in 23-25 was their max plus 5%, right? We gave them 5% for growth.
Yeah.
So the caps, the initial caps are created in the same way across the board for everyone, regardless of the size of the court. That scaled cap then is also tied to their spending. So they're at the scaled cap because they have spent 66% of their 23-25 funds. So it really shouldn't be like the size of the court doesn't come into play for the caps. I want to go ahead and Connie, you had something first, so I want to hear from you.
Oh, I was just looking that their average participant last biennium was 8, and they're anticipating 35 this time. And I think that increase in the number of participants would justify an increased need in services.
Thanks for sharing that. Jake, go ahead.
And I don't disagree with what was just said about the increase in numbers, but with what we got last last biennium to where we are this year, 66% of the expenditure. And that's not money that comes back into the drug court program for us to award later. That's money that goes back to the state and general fund. So we never see that money again.
Correct.
So we have to be able to show, hey, we're spending all of our money. And yeah, it's a small ask, 100,000. I get that. But when we only spend 66,000 and we're giving back 40,000, that's huge because that 40,000 can do some other county a great deal. So I don't disagree with any conversation about that's a small ask. And they're trying to fulfill their funding through other means. But at the same time, we only spent 66, and that's money that if they don't spend over the next 2 quarters, we'll never see again for this program.
That is correct. The funds, once the project period's over, the funds are not returned to treatment courts. That's true. Go ahead, Joe.
Maybe a little different topic here with this. So I actually thought the application was great as well in the budget. The only part though to me, and I don't know if this is because they're trying to revamp, and I know they had some challenges with the contract, at the end of 25, and they kind of actually state it here in the budget narrative, but they don't clarify what services that they're billing for and not billing for. So I think that's kind of, if I heard you right, that's what the staff picked up on.
Yes.
And so, and kind of being consistent, if there wasn't a narrative that kind of outlined that and separated it, then that kicks you into the bucket of a reduction. And so, I would support that just from that fact. It was just, to me, it was a little disappointing just because like the judge, felt like this application is really good. The request was modest considering what they're doing. But I kind of ended up falling in that, we got to be fair to the other programs that had that same, reduction made if they didn't explain those things and what the difference between billable service was and wasn't. So it's just my thoughts.
Okay, so I think, again, what I need from you all is a consensus. So I think that for this one, I think I'm hearing the majority of folks saying to keep it at the recommended scaled cap with that initial 20% deduction for not knowing how it was broken down. So funding as recommended on the screen. So I
can do that, Adeline. I can do that.
Okay. I think you and Connie were the two that were kind of not in favor of that initially. I think we can move forward though, since it sounds like we have a consensus of at least 4 people. Is that perfect? Okay, I got a thumbs up. Perfect. All right. Let's keep going then. All right, so next up we had Jackson County Adult Drug Court. In their narrative, they clarified the use of multiple validated risk tools. They are another court that noted that UA results for individuals who are not taking any medication are received in 2 to 3 days. And then results for those who are taking medication, they get those back in 4 to 5 days. Now, they had some clarification around their program fee of $150 that is used to support incentives and court events, and that participants can opt to put any awarded incentive funds towards the program fee. They explained that most participants are lodged in jail when entering the program and then are transferred to the transition center. While technically still in custody, they are no longer housed at the main jail. Since SCMS options are limited, the participants were often still listed as in custody, kind of due to some of the limitations on the data collection. They further clarified that longer jail sanctions have been used in lieu of termination from the program, but rarely and only as a last resort. They've continued to expand program participation, and individuals are allowed to do an open plea without a DA offer. They're continuing to work with community partners to increase their SCMS data entry, and they have crafted a draft mission statement for the advisory committee and have identified potential committee members, so working towards standing up that advisory committee. Right. They have an average participation of 38. Their completion rate is 68%, and they have a spending of 78%. Now, we recommended fully funding them to their initial cap, or to their scale cap, I apologize. So no cuts, is what I'm trying to say. Are there any recommendations to this court? Joe?
So based on our last conversation, I guess the question I have related to treatment services again is they're listing out all these treatment services that they're doing and billing for, but they don't actually separate out. I mean, at least maybe I missed it, what is billable and not billable. So did the staff see something else?
I think that we went by their rates that they provided in those, basically the data that they provided. As staff, we felt it made sense. We didn't have any additional information other than the narrative that you all can see as well. But also, I want to clarify something. I misspoke earlier. We did make some reductions to supplies. We reduced their office supplies to match 60 participants served. I'm sorry about that. And then because of that adjustment, we had to adjust their admin as well. My apologies. Honey, go ahead.
I was just wondering about the having the clinical supervisor in addition to the counselors, what the benefit of that would be. We said in another one previously that having the supervisor wasn't necessary for staffing.
Again, we only have the information that you have as well. So if that is a recommendation that you would like to make, that you want to reduce that due to them not being necessary at staffing, that is absolutely something that you can recommend.
Just a second, I got it.
Do you want to make that recommendation?
I don't know. I'm reading it. I mean, because, it says clinical supervision is core to the continued success of the program. Clinical supervision is provided as needed and officially 1 hour per month. That
So
doesn't come out to the 27,000.
So I do know that part of what staff considered was that they noted fidelity monitoring as part of it.
Okay.
What did you mean by that, Adeline? Like, when they go ahead.
We noted that they had mentioned fidelity monitoring, so they weren't. That is something that could take unbillable hours, I think is what I'm trying to say. And that is tied to the standards as well, like fidelity to the standards. But again, I want to know if you all want to make a recommendation other than staff, you're welcome to.
I think in reading through, especially with the standing up of the advisory committee and you're pointing out the kind of their clinical role, it looks like to be more aimed at the bigger picture, program fidelity, best practices. I think that to me is a sufficient explanation for that. So I think I'm okay with funding this as recommended.
Connie, I saw you nod your head. Are you in agreement with that, or would you like to continue with your initial?
I still have some issues with it. The clinical supervisor ensures the clinical staff use appropriate and trauma-informed clinical interventions. That should be standard practice for any trained clinician to be doing it. Shouldn't have to be overseen constantly. I'm not sure that, it almost sounds more like a court monitor in addition to the clinical supervisor is kind of, the SCMS and all of that.
Yeah, I will note that they're only requesting an hour a month. So
Okay.
I think that was really honing into that kind of fidelity monitoring piece. Joe, go ahead.
I'm not going to support it. It's just me, but I'm not supporting it in part because we already had a application that had something similar in nature to it, and we didn't support that being funded. So I don't, kind of doesn't matter if it's an hour or 5 hours, and at least for me. But I also do.
Oh, yeah.
I fully understand the concern
Supposed to
about.
stop by earlier, so I didn't know.
Jake, mute yourself.
There he goes. He's on
There
it.
you go. But I fully understand, like, this is just kind of, I mean, it's interesting. I'm kind of reading these going, man, I should have billed for all my time in some of these things so that I don't get compensated for technically that way, I guess. But so anyway, for me, I'm not going to support it because I think we need to be fair and equitable across the
Sure.
applications. And I think that that we didn't do it in another one for same reasons I have concerns about, so I won't support it in this one either.
Right. So I do want to note that the prior application that we discussed didn't specify the need for fidelity monitoring. They asked for staffing, which isn't best practice. However, what you all are going for, we just need a consensus. So I hear two of you saying, take it out. I see two of you saying leave it in, and that is an even split. So really, I need a consensus one way or the other, a majority one or the other. So if we could hear from Jake, or if we could hear from Kelsey, we just need to know, we need a consensus or a majority one way or the other, whether you want it reduced or whether you want it cut or left in, basically.
I'm not saying leave it in, so I don't know.
Oh, my apologies. Okay,
No, that's
my
okay.
apologies.
No.
Okay.
And I wanted to clarify, Connie, your position is behavioral health, right? Wellness.
Yes, it is.
So you bring that expertise to the table.
Absolutely. And my supervisor has never attended court.
Okay.
Okay. So then what I'm hearing from the consensus is to remove that line item.
Or did we
Recommended.
say 80%? Is that what we did on the last? Because 20% is not.
Yeah.
That is up to you. So typically, if we felt that a position wasn't tied directly to participants, and then it was completely removed. If we just didn't have enough information to figure out how it was figured out, then we reduced it by 20%.
Connie, I'm going to jump in and on the like on our staffing, we have our treatment providers. We only have one person from we have two providers, and we only have one person from each providing the report from the others. Would that be a supervisor or?
In our court, no, it would not. That would just be the primary provider attending.
And I think, again, I want to draw us back. The fact that we're asking these questions, right, shows that this information wasn't provided in this application. So just kind of bringing it back to that. So again, I'm going to ask, is the recommendation, so I guess we'll start by the recommendation is a reduction, I think is what I'm hearing, majority. And so what do you recommend that reduction be?
Could we reduce it? I think it says like 20 units per month. Could we reduce that down to like 5 units per month? So that there's still coverage for the services that supervisor specifically maybe needs to do?
Okay, so cut it down to that particular amount of time based on the appropriate duties for the supervisor. Perfect. That is exactly.
Do
the
others
kind of-
agree with that?
Is that the consensus?
Just for me, I won't support it.
Can I remember what we did on, what did we completely remove the clinical on the other one? Or was it just a reduction?
We will double check, but my understanding was that it was completely removed. But again, they didn't have that additional
Right, yeah.
information. Right.
I understand that. I'm just I don't remember the exact details.
Yeah,
of that,
it
and
was-
that would be helpful in this.
It was not funded. It was completely removed.
And that was for the director position.
Correct.
So, that's for the director position. And I have a supervisor that's from our therapeutic program, sit in, but they don't charge, we don't pay them any different because her participation level is that of our therapist. Granted, we only have 3 therapists. So, nevertheless, I don't disagree with reducing it from 20 to 5.
Okay. Is that the consensus? Okay. Can I actually have you, thank you, Judge. Can I have you, if you are in favor of that reduction, can you do a thumbs up? I just want to make sure I have the right numbers. Jake, was yours a thumbs up? A physical in-person thumbs up? Perfect. Okay, so that will be the reduction. Perfect. Perfect in the sense that now I know what we're doing. All right. And just so you all know, so we're being clear, due to that reduction, we'll also scale down their admin accordingly to that 10% mark. All right. Next up is Union County Adult Drug Court. In their narrative, they noted that the DA and sheriff's offices have more staffing and are now able to consistently participate in team staffing. They're also looking at having additional community partners join. They have revised their policy and procedure manual to reflect updated eligibility criteria. They've clarified methods for monitoring and delivering proper treatment dosage. They adopted an updated incentive program that went into effect the 1st of this month. It includes strategies that increase the number of incentives for participants and tracking more non-tangible incentives. So getting closer to that 4-to-1 ratio. They did clarify that the judge spends an average of 4.9 minutes with each participant. And they have plans to establish an advisory committee in the coming biennium in 2027 grant cycle. They did clarify and confirm that the court does provide interpreters and will continue to identify additional resources for participants who prefer a language other than English. And they will also continue to update and enhance their onboarding process. So with that, their average participation was 25. Their completion was 46%, and their spending is at 37%. So we stuck to their prioritization sheet as much as possible to make these reductions. So these reductions were as pictured here. And again, that was utilizing their scenario C in their prioritization sheet as much as possible. So with that, do you have any additional recommendations for this court?
So Adeline, maybe I'm on the wrong one. Oh, no. I've got it there. Okay, never mind. I didn't have the right amount in there. The drug testing seemed high to me. Maybe I didn't have the right numbers, but did your team do the math on the drug testing?
We did, and as far as our recommendation, it was that we had enough information to justify it. So yes. However, I do want to note that there was some reduction just based on their prioritization sheet. Connie, go ahead.
In looking over the budget projection, it says participant supports and incentives OJD, and then it has participant supports and incentives county. Why is it separated? Why is that separated?
That was actually the way it should be done. There were a couple of courts that tried to combine them. So all that means is that they would like some of that funding to go to be utilized by OJD on their spots cards versus having it sit with the county. So you'll notice as you go through, several did that. It just has to do with sometimes it'll be easier to utilize the OJD spots card and they can get purchases made quicker. So that is very much within, they are allowed to do that. It's all coming out of the same pot. But some of it is just essentially given to OJD to utilize for, this is both true for supplies and training and travel.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, and just so you know, if we are unable, so we did have at least one, if not more, requests for a very similar request, but they didn't separate it, and then they asked it to be separated in the narrative. They'll have to let us know what that separation looks like. We won't, if it's recommended for funding, we wouldn't be able to. We have to know how much to go. It's not one pot that you can decide on the fly, if that makes sense. Jake, go ahead.
Did you indicate that their current spending is about 34%?
37, yes.
37%? Is there, unfortunately, I know we're not privy to why that is.
They noted in their narrative that it was tied to a lack of defense attorneys, is what they noted in their narrative.
So they spent 37% of their fundings due to shortage of defense attorneys or public defenders?
Yeah, public defenders, yes, my apologies.
Which was in part what they clarified, I think, was screening or getting people in to review applications or consult with to enter the program.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, those questions, oh, go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, I'm still just trying to figure out the UA thing. I was waiting to see if, I mean, I can see based on their math, and I don't obviously know who they use. We're gonna spend that, but even if I'm just going like units per month, they're saying 184, and then they're saying some of these are billable and some aren't. And this is a standard. And I, quite honestly, before this meeting, I should have looked it up, but I haven't looked up what the current OHP billing is in terms of how many UAs you can do and confirmation test per year or within the cycle of service. But if you just look across the board and all, I don't know that we've seen a UA request like this from anyone. So I just feel, I don't know what I'm missing, and I don't know what lab they're using. It's kind of a weird thing to just so significantly different than everyone else in the state. And I thought most counties or providers contract with Cordon for services. I'm not certain for every single thing. I know our drug court does something different. We use Redwood still, but
And I'll be honest, we don't know either. We just have to go by what information was provided. So if you're thinking that number is too high and you want to make a reduction, you could potentially, again, utilize the same staff methodology and utilize that 20% reduction due to a lack of that math breakdown. You can, of course, leave it as is, or if you have a different methodology that you would like it to be used, we can do that as well. I'm open to a recommendation. We just need to
Okay.
connect it to a number.
Do you think the math is right, Jill? I mean, I saw the same thing. They say they do 140 tests a month. Does that come out right with 25 participants? And
Yeah, I mean, even if you're just doing 2 tests, I mean, if you're doing weekly testing on 25 people,
yeah,
I mean, that's 100.
right.
So, if you're doing it twice a week, it's 200, in theory, I guess, but, or more, double. But my thing is just the cost of, I don't know if they're, again, it's just one of those things like the cost they're paying, I don't know, I'm used to like $12 or $10 or with extra tests, $21 or something, not $50 and $60 for every test. And so I'm just wondering, is this maybe a Rachel thing? I mean,
Yeah, I was
Rachel's
going to
still
say Rachel's appeared on screen, so I'm
Oh,
wondering if she
look.
can enlighten us.
We're there. And just, I forgot to say this earlier, I've known Rachel forever. Thank you for still being here. I think the world of you, and we're all lucky to have her. So
Oh, here.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to be a part of this world. And I would just, so not specifically speaking on any one application, I think what I would offer in the UA world is something we've heard pretty consistently for the past 2 years. There's been substantial changes in what can be billed for drug tests. All of the CCOs are implementing, it's called the HERC. And what they're able to bill for is, I think, a factor that is, again, looking a little different depending on each of your CCOs. So each program may have some variability with what they're being allowed to bill versus not. The second piece of this, though, is really highlighting, I think, a broader state issue, Joe, that you're bringing up, and that's the rate issue. So we're seeing that whether it's a treatment provider or some probation departments, their contracted rates are vastly different across each of the locations. So we could be paying $50 for a test in one community and 10 in another, and that's based on the negotiation. So I think a good consideration for statewide improvement and looking at how we might be able to negotiate some type of statewide rate. But as of now, we are at a state of great variability, again, based on where you're at.
Thanks, Rachel. Can you stay on? Because I'm kind of wondering if we might have additional. Don't go anywhere. Please help. Go ahead, Connie.
In looking at this, one of my other concerns is that it says 25 clients with 184 tests per month. Are none of them being billed to insurance at all? Because it doesn't seem like all of them should be being paid for by the grant. At least some of those should be covered by insurance.
And again, I will say, what we have is what's in the narrative. So I think, again, trying to kind of be thoughtful about staff methodology or about the methodology you all want to use. What I'm hearing is a lot of, we don't know how they got to this number. So maybe this is a moment that, if you feel this is an appropriate recommendation, to utilize that 20% reduction based on the methodology that we've used thus far, saying we couldn't figure it out. There wasn't enough information. So we need to reduce this further. And maybe, there definitely is some stuff in the narrative. So maybe just we can do a quick review if you all, I'm hoping you all have access to it. You can do a quick review of that narrative just to double check that we're not missing anything. And then again, we want to take that recommendation. So whatever you decide to make as a recommendation, we just need to make sure it's connected to some sort of number.
So I'm looking at the narrative and like I said, I'm bad at math, but the last part where it says $60 a test times 250 tests equals 15,000, an average of 10 tests a month. Is that right? Because 10 tests a month for 24 months, 240. Okay. Times 60.
I will say,
I
it
think
does
the
look like they have one line in there that, because there was a question of any were paid for by health, by OHP or somewhere else, and they do have the first line in there saying that UAs for treatment court may not be billed to OHP beyond the 36% of UA tests and 12 confirmation tests. I read that to mean that those would be paid for by OHP, and these requests were for beyond that. So that some are being billed to OHP. The number and how that works, I defer to many of you who have more expertise, but I wanted to point that out.
Annie, when you read that, Rachel was emphatically shaking her head yes. So I believe that you have interpreted that correctly. Go ahead, Joe.
I feel terrible about continuing this conversation, but Wallowa County and Umatilla County are neighboring counties, and both of them say they use Assure drug detection, and so I just don't understand how their costs are so dramatically different that it just kind of it's hard to understand. Like if you're using the same provider, I'm off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain it's the same CCO.
So, Joe,
And
I am
you're-
gonna cut you off a little bit in the sense
Yeah.
that I don't want to make any inferences about who, right? We have to go by the information that's provided. But what I'm hearing all of you say, as you all take out your phone calculators, is that we don't know how this is being figured out, right? So I think that under that, guys, I would again say anytime as staff we had that moment where we couldn't figure it out, we made a 20% reduction. I think that is absolutely sticking with the methodology that we have used thus far. So if that is your recommendation, we can do that. Or again, if you want to use the information you have to make a different type of reduction recommendation, you can do that as well. But I just want to be cognizant of you all are very busy people and we do have a lot of courts to get through. And I want to make sure too that we're utilizing the information that is provided in those applications.
So if you
Yeah.
add up each of those tests they have listed separately, it comes out to that 220,000. I don't understand why all of those tests wouldn't be combined into one single test though. I think a 20% reduction would be reasonable.
I
Is
was gonna
that
say, based on what Connie said there, I think that I'd be fine with that as well.
so the 20% reduction is your recommendation on the drug testing?
Yes.
And that is consensus? I'm seeing
Yeah, I was gonna
heads
say
nodding. Sorry, say that again?
I was just asking if everyone else agrees.
I saw lots
We
of
got
head
some
nods.
thumbs up.
Yeah, we got thumbs up, we've got head nods. All right. Any other recommendations for Union ADC?
Just for the record, I actually don't support it. It's just too significant of a cost compared to everything else, so I won't support it.
All right. Next up, we have Malheur County Adult Drug Court. Again, I don't have any additional information for you. That was in the narrative feedback. All right. So their average participation was 13. They had a completion rate of 53%, and their spending was at 49%. I don't have noted any staff recommendations on cuts, but I do have it noted that the cap was that we scaled to their cap via their prioritization sheet. So any of these cuts you're seeing were based on their prioritization sheet.
So it went to 80% because they have only spent 49.
Right.
Are you able to tell us how much of their training they spent in the last biennium?
We could look it up for you if you wanted that information. I don't have it in front of me.
It just, since the recommended is that it be reduced to 0, I'm wondering if that's because they didn't utilize it last time.
And again, that is due to their prioritization. So we went by what they said they were going to prioritize. The minds behind this operation are looking it up as we speak.
It just seems like, I mean, training in all rice seems like such an important part of the specialty court.
Go ahead, Jake.
Is there personnel, because I don't have it right in front of me, is there personnel, what is their personnel category? Is that for a probation officer, or is that a different staff member?
That was for a jail coordinator.
Oh, okay.
And a PO, wasn't it?
And a PO.
But the reduction is only the jail coordinator.
Per their prioritization sheet. Per their prioritization, the PO was fully funded at 25% FTE. While they're looking that up for the percentage that they spent on training, I do want to note again, Connie, that there is ability to have budgets adjusted. So again, there is potential, right, for if down the line, if things were not used, they could potentially adjust funds to go back for training travel.
One thing I am curious about, I know the recommendation is a reduction already for the jail coordinator, but that's specific to in custody folks. And that seems, I guess it's 10% of their time. So it is pretty limited, but I'm trying to remember if they had, if they're not using incarceration, or, it just seems a weird request to have a person in jail when the drug court programs are not ideally keeping people in jail beyond sanctions or kind of minimal things. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that, but I just thought I'm trying to wrap my head around how useful that role seems to be.
I think that probably that would lead to a lot of, having a jail coordinator would lead to a lot of recommendations for people when they first come into custody, being referred and speeding up the process of getting them their initial assessments and such to get them engaged.
Okay, so it's the beginning you're seeing it as that.
That's what I was interpreting it as.
Also, not to change the subject, but going back, they were awarded 7,500 for training in 23-25 and have a little over 6,800 left to spend. Or I apologize, they've spent 6,853, so they have just a tiny bit left to spend, about 12%.
Well, one thing we do know, kind of supporting what Connie said, is that if that's one area that's easy to spend, right? And if and it's especially if it's a court that needs help and ideas and motivation, having that training is a good way to get that spent and get that motivation.
So then I bring back the now age-old question. Do you have any additional recommendations for this court?
I recommend we fund half their training.
Okay, so if we go away from their prioritization sheet and we want to fund half their training, do you recommend we go over that scaled cap, or should we take that, if it's half, $6,000 from a different area? Because again, I just want to make it crystal clear, the reduction to their training was not staff, that was based on their prioritization sheet.
I would say we go.
Adeline, can I interrupt real fast? I'm sorry. Just real quick. This is Rachel.
Yes. Yes.
Just real
Hi,
fast.
Rachel.
I typed that out wrong. They've only spent 12.1% of their training. So they
Oh,
have
so-
68. That was my fault. They have 6,800 left to spend. So I
Okay.
apologize for that.
Thanks,
Never mind
Rachel.
then, if it's not being spent, then then I can't see continuing to fund it. Never mind.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the clarification. So with that knowledge, do we want to continue with the staff recommendation here? I see some head nods and one thumbs up. All right. I hear no objections. All right. So next up, we have Umatilla and Morrow Counties Adult Drug Court. They noted that they're requesting funding for alternative options for weekend and holiday drug testing. They're also requesting funding for training for team members on best practice standards and eligibility. Their funding request includes an increase in treatment allocation to work with their providers to determine mechanisms to best ensure that the program is administering their proper dosage based on risk and need. And the program will use participant supports as a mean to broaden incentive options. It's the notes I have from their narrative. So with that, they have an average participation of 31. Their completion rate is 44%, and their spending is at 63%. Now, in personnel, we did recommend removing the finance director, as it's an administrative cost and isn't directly tied to the participants. We also recommended, okay, go to that slide. We did recommend cuts to both the clinician and screening. Again, that was cut by 20%, as they didn't provide the information that we needed to determine that rate per participant, as the numbers were presented in full. We noted that while treatment funds are obviously needed, not every participant would require those services. The additional percentage that you'll notice from the clinician was reduced via their prioritization sheet to get to that scaled cap. And then similarly, that 20% reduction to housing was again done by staff because there was no explanation of units or cost of kind of how they came to that amount. It was just 2 units of a big number.
I agree with the removal of the finance director. My notes, I thought that was an administrative cost that should have been capped.
So with that, do you have any additional recommendations for this court's funding? All right, I've heard nothing, so we'll continue on. Oh, and I got a thumbs up. There it is. All right, next up we have Clackamas County Adult Drug Court. They noted that they do plan to stand up an advisory committee. They will continue to expand access to services to ensure proper dosage. The team will use validated risk and assessment tools and monitor program services and outcomes. They have plans to broaden their incentive options to meet that 4-to-1 minimum ratio. They clarified that all treatment court team members attend staffing. They did note that their team will continue to increase their use of SCMS and clarified that they do and will continue to provide services to those whose preferred language isn't English. So with that, here's their recommended funding. They have an average of 43 participants. Their completion rate is 37%, and their spending is at 47%. Now, I do want to note in contractual services, both of those line items were cut to reflect 43 participants, since there was no information given to determine why they would expect an increase in participants. Also notable is that all housing was reduced by 20% by staff, as we were again unable to determine how those funds were calculated due to that kind of limited narrative response.
Did you say their participants were 33 or 43?
43. Joe, go ahead.
I had a question around, I don't know if you know this or not, but it would be helpful to know, how big is the Arbor House?
I do not have that information. The only thing we have is what they wrote in their narrative.
Okay.
So with that, any additional recommendations on funding for this court? Going once, going twice. Yeah, Joe.
Sorry, just a quick question again about some reason that Google Drive for me keeps freezing up, and 1 second, I just need to pull something up. Maybe.
In my experience, technology always stops in that moment you need it to work.
Well, it is definitely doing that. Well, I need to see the document before I can ask my question. So I guess proceed. Part of what it is I did the staff. I know you guys are supposed to look at them individually and not compare programs, but for some reason, I thought I noticed a discrepancy in the same identical request in their adult and their mental health for this service for the number of participants, but there was a discrepancy in the cost. And so I didn't know.
So we looked at each court individually and really tried to stick to that. So if there was a discrepancy, we went by what they gave us in each individual application.
Even if it's the same exact service at the same exact place at two different costs?
We did.
Okay.
Now, again, if we did, that is what we went by. Now, if going through, if you have a recommendation, I believe that Arbor House is with their housing, right? If you have a recommendation, you're absolutely welcome to let us know beyond that reduction of 20%.
All right. It finally just pulled up.
It is a lot for housing for both of them, so.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is, I think one is like 361,000 for 24 units. And then it says the same thing, it looks like to me, is 75,840 in the other application. So that maybe they calculated differently depending on who was doing it, but it says number of units required 24, price per unit 3,164. Yeah, and then when I go into the other one and look at it, it's
So,
same
wow.
month. Yeah, 24 units for 361,000.
Well, I have no doubt that the discrepancy that you're saying is real if it's right in front of you. I do want to kind of bring us back, and we do have to go just court by court. So I think what we need now is a recommendation for specifically for Clackamas ADC about, do you have a recommendation further for housing for them?
And you've reduced it 20% because they didn't spell out like the units, like how many
Correct.
people are using that housing. They just gave you an amount.
Correct.
And they do have, what are we on? Clackamas, 43 participants.
Hmm?
Is there, Adeline, was it based on their priorities, the reduction in the drug testing versus at a 72% versus the housing at 80%?
Beyond the fact that we cut their contractual services to reflect 43 participants, because we didn't feel there was
that's
a
right.
description.
Thank you.
And then, Adeline, this is Jake, just
Mhm.
looking at the personnel.
Mhm.
It's mental health specialists 2 and mental health specialist 3 for adult drug court. And then looking at their mental health court application, their funding sheet, it's the exact same 2 positions. So, and in reading the narratives, it doesn't say anything about alcohol and drug treatment, it just talks about the continuum between alcohol and drug and mental health. So are we funding under alcohol and through the drug court, are we funding the same position twice? I mean, is it the same position? They were funding it twice under both, so the mental health Specialist 3 is being funded in an ADC and the mental health court?
So
Or,
I'm going to be honest with you, Jake. I don't have an answer for that, especially because we really very clearly tried to go to really focus on these individually as each court. So I can't speak to that per se.
understood.
Adeline,
Understood.
I
I
think
just-
it has percentages. So I think it's 10, I could be reading it wrong, but it's for the drug, alcohol, for drug court, it's 10%. So it may be
Okay,
the same
so an
person, but maybe
FTE.
they're different. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So again, I'm going to bring in my broken record self. Do we have any additional recommendations for this court's funding?
Joe, would you feel comfortable reducing it a little bit more than the 80% because of the housing is not articulated well. We don't know necessarily how many units, and then the math on the treatment was off, and we had to reduce that down to 43 for 43 participants. So maybe we reduce the housing more than the 80% to 70%.
To be honest with you, Your Honor, I don't know that I can support it, period. And the only reason I say that is I mean, when I'm looking at, I'm really unclear about why we're looking at courts individually if we have similar resources that are being asked. And I know historically that I know some people write grants that way, and we factored that in the past as well. So it sounds like there's the direction moving forward is view them individually, but when it's specific same price per unit or the exact same service within the community, it's saying here's the exact number of units that are required, and it's exactly the same. So there's 24 units, and then it's got two completely different prices with a discrepancy of, I don't know, off the top of my head, close to, $300,000 in an ask. It's pretty substantial for me. And so I don't know what all's in the Arbor House with your support. I just don't know how you can make a request for that just has it that different without any explanation. So maybe it's a percentage. I don't understand. Maybe it's whatever. And the idea that I would support something that's $300,000 difference, I don't know how to do that. I understand the other one though, and I could support that, but I just don't know how to vote for this one or recommend for this one. So
When you say the mental health, or when you say the other one, do you mean you could support the mental health one, but not this one because it's higher?
yeah, I read it as a percentage, is how I was reading it. And so that's not uncommon, obviously, and there's a lot of advantages. I mean, we've done that before in the past too, locally, have the same person who can go between the courts and actually even cover for the courts, for a variety of things. So that I support that if it's a percentage. And so that's how I read it as well as you did. But the other one, I don't understand at all. And it's just a large number and a large discrepancy for me. And so I'm just uncomfortable with that.
I will say, from my experience, from my court, so we have 3 of them, and we don't have a grant writer other than our coordinators. So I don't ever want my coordinator to be penalized for being different than another coordinator who writes or who assists, and now the county does it. But
that's a really great intro, Judge, for what I was going to say. So I hear we're wanting to potentially recommend a reduction in housing funds. And if you do want to do that, again, I just need to be clear. I'm going to need a reason that it ties to standards, right? That ties to numbers. It can't be just because that's what they did in mental health court, because we are just focusing right now on the adult drug court. So I hear what everyone is saying. I'll just need you to vocalize. If you do move forward with that type of recommendation, I'll need some vocalization of how we're going to get there beyond we want to do what they did in drug court or in mental health court.
I'll throw out a recommendation then based on what we've discussed, and I'm totally happy with anybody pushing back or suggesting something different. But I'm gonna throw out 70% based on the 80% because we couldn't figure it out. And then additionally, because they overestimated their participants on the UAs, which would warrant them, us making the assumption that they also overestimated the participants for housing.
Okay, so just to, I'm going to say it back so you can correct me if I'm wrong. The recommendation is to reduce the 20% due to lack of explanation and then further reduce to 70% to reflect 43 participants. Okay. All right, I am seeing and is this for all housing or is this just for Arbor House?
I was thinking all housing because it was easier for me to do the math. Let me look at the application.
And will that also impact the administrative?
If it does, we will reduce the administrative. The administrative has to be 10% or less. So if it does, we'll reduce that further.
Well, I'm going to assume if we're saying that the participant numbers were high on the UA and that's a reason for reducing for housing, it would be all for housing. So not just Arbor House.
Okay. I'm looking towards other GRC members. This has been the recommendation that's put forward by Judge Kitson-McCaddish. Is that the majority of the GRC? Is that how you all want to move forward? Is that the consensus? All right. All right, so one last drug court here. So this is Yamhill County Adult Drug Court. In their narrative explanations in response to feedback, they clarified that all core team members attend staffing. They clarified that jail as a sanction is a last resort and that it is not used for treatment. On occasion, a participant will go directly from jail to inpatient, but that is due to request by either that participant and or their attorney. They clarified that they complete UAs a minimum of twice a week, including over weekends and holidays. UAs are sent to the lab daily, but as many other courts have mentioned, the turnaround for results is longer than that. It can be 1 to 2 weeks. The coordinator will discuss the implementation of incentives sanctioned services grid at their next policy meeting. And they have requested funds for Incentive Bootcamp 2026, which is put on by OSCA, to expand incentive ideas. The coordinator plans to incorporate an overview of standards in new hire orientation. And the Yamhill County Court coordinators met with Community Justice Director in June to begin talks about an advisory committee meeting annually. So with that, their average participation was 24. Their their completion rate is 57%, and their spending is 82%. Staff is recommending fully funding them, and I don't have any additional information due to that. All right. Do we have any additional recommendations for this court? All right. So we're done with adult drug courts. I am going to request, if it's all right with the GRC, since it's exactly 3 o'clock, that we take a 10-minute break, get beverages, use the restroom, stretch a little, and then we come back at 3:10. Is that all right with everyone? All right.
Justine, or sorry, not Justine, Adeline, sorry. I got a
No worries.
message. I got a message that the slideshow wasn't showing the slides. I can see it, but I don't know
Oh.
if some other people couldn't see it.
Okay, well, what I will do is I will stop sharing this. I will, when we come back at 3:10, I'll re-upload it and hopefully that'll be a nice IT quality restart.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, welcome back. That was a quick 10 minutes, at least for me. All right. So I'm looking, I think I see all of our GRC members. And good. We'll go ahead and get started with our mental health courts. So first up, we have Josephine County Mental Health Court. They noted their written eligibility criteria, which is defined objectively and considers referrals from any source. It was updated in September of 24 to include participants be moderate, high risk to moderate, high need. They also noted they use validated risk assessments and routine assessments are done to ensure appropriate dosages of treatment. They recently began recording incentives that had not previously been noted, and they also maintain a community grant for incentives. Both should help to align to that incentive sanction ratio. Excuse me. They will seek out trainings to increase knowledge of benefits of incentives. They will be discussing the use of jail as a sanction at their August policy meeting, and they'll be creating defined criteria for use of jail sanction and exploring alternatives. They have developed a system to receive consistent data from their partners to be put into SCMS, and they will be searching for and utilizing treatment opportunities, or especially those, I said treatment, incentive opportunities, especially those that are low cost and free. They'll be exploring alternative options for drug testing, and they have updated their graduate requirements and policy and handbook to require negative UAs for 90 days prior to graduation. So lots of updates in their narrative. Here is their recommended funding. They are at 17 participants on average. They have a 68% completion rate and are at 84% spending. Now, all of the cuts that you see here were based on their prioritization sheet. Staff did not have any recommended reductions beyond that.
I'm sorry, Justine, what was the participant number?
It was 17. Do you all have any additional recommendations for this court? All right, we'll go to the next one then. Bear with me here. There we go. All right, next up, we have Lane County Mental Health Court. They noted that they're working to add a member of law enforcement to their treatment court team, but have not had active engagement from local agencies. They did clarify that low risk and low need individuals are ineligible for their treatment court programs. They clarified that services are delivered at dosages that align with each participant's needs. They noted that the version of the sanction grid mentioned in the preliminary application listed the jail sanction up to 7 days. In practice, they have not imposed any jail sanctions longer than 6 days in the last 18 months. Typical sanctions last 1 to 4 days, and the team will bring the grid into alignment with best practices at their next team meeting. They have completed several trainings and are planning to complete several more. They have an average participation of 26. Their completion rate is 68%, and their spending is at 84%. Now, if you don't mind, I'll go to the next one just to kind of outline a couple things we did. So staff did recommend cutting the defense attorney 20% due to the lack of justification for the hours spent. And we suggested a reduction of the emergence drug testing and lab fees, cut to reflect the maximum test rate that they provided in the narrative. So the math in the sheet said the cost would be about $260.50 per test, but the range they provided in the narrative had the highest cost at just under $70.
That was a good catch, Adeline, because I just caught that myself.
I appreciate it, but again, want to give all appreciation to the treatment court team. That definitely was not me or just me.
I just have a question so I understand that, because the DA, when you talked about the narrative explanation of the public defender not being explained, is that based on the their narrative or on their budget projection sheet?
Yeah, the narrative within that budget projection sheet, and they didn't justify the 0.2 FTE for the mental health court.
Okay, because I mean, that makes sense to me. The descriptions between all of the roles seem pretty minimal. You know, they all kind of just say they're central to these roles. And so I just trying to make sure we're treating them all the same.
Sure.
So Annie, are you saying that the, for the DA as well, and the, is it a probation officer and the DA and the defender all have, or defense attorney all have similar descriptions, but we're only cutting the defense?
That's how I read it, at least. And that's why I was wondering if there was other explanation that I missed somewhere.
I think what staff's thought process was looking at the percentage FTE that they asked for each position. Could it make sense based on our knowledge and what we know? Is it reasonable for those FTE? But that being said, if you would like to make an additional recommendation based on the information in the narrative, or in this case, lack of information in the narrative, that is absolutely within, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Because, I mean, we do want equity, of course. And also part of the reason that we bring the GRC in, you all, is A, because you have a wide, diverse amount of knowledge, but also we love checks and balances, right? So if you think staff missed it and want to continue that, that's absolutely why we're here.
I agree with Annie that they all sound similar and they all have FTEs assigned to them. And if, yeah, I agree.
So just to make sure that we have it correct in our notes, the GRC is recommending a reduction of 20% to all lines in the personnel category due to that lack of justification, lack of ability to figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm seeing some heads nodding from 4 of you and a thumbs up. All right, that would be majority. Do we have any additional recommendations for this court?
I just thought the costs were high per participant, but I think I was using a different participant number. I think they had 13 down, and I think you said they have 26.
Yeah, their average participation was 26. All right, well, if we don't have additional recommendations, we'll keep on rolling. So next up, we have Columbia County Mental Health Court. Their response to feedback included a notation that they would work to form a subcommittee to act as the treatment court advisory committee, and this has been added to their next LPSC agenda. Also noted that they attended the incentive camp that was put on by OSCA in April and have already put several incentives into practice. They will continue this incentive expansion into next biennium. And I just do want to take a note across the board. I want to give a little shout out to the OSCA team and specifically regarding this incentives bootcamp training. I don't know if you all noticed, I definitely noticed that there were many, many courts that acknowledged it and said how helpful it was. So shout out to the incentive bootcamp. It was pretty popular. We're talking to you, Rachel Mark. We saw that. All right. So with that, I do want to note that these cuts were done via their prioritization sheet. We didn't have any additional staff-related cuts. And their average participation was at 13. Their completion was at 56%, and their spending is at 61%.
And you're sitting outside.
All right. Not sounding like we have any additional recommendations. So we'll move on to Clatsop County's mental health court. In response to the feedback in the narrative, they noted that they plan to hold quarterly data review meetings and will report evaluation data to their policy and advisory committees. Their pre-court staffing is now mandatory for all team members. They plan to update their policy and procedure manual to reflect attendance expectations. Their eligibility process will be revised to require the use of validated risk tools for all new participants. And the RANT tool will no longer be used as the sole risk assessment tool. Low-risk individuals will be referred to less intensive services unless otherwise clinically justified. And if they are accepted, they will be placed on a separate track. They plan to implement dosage benchmarks aligned with risk. We'll develop risk separation protocols to ensure risk levels aren't mixed in groups or in supervision. They clarified that jail is not used for treatment, and they have an improved pre-court staffing process that will allow the judge more structured time per participant. So lots of updates from Clatsop County Mental Health Court in response to your feedback. All right. So they have an average participation of 23, a completion of 35%, and their spending is at 80%. Now, a couple notes, if I may, I'm going to go over again, and then I'll come back to this. I do want to note that we as staff did recommend that the new probation deputy position that was at 0.5 FTE referenced the adult drug court in their narrative, but they didn't mention the mental health court at all or explain why this new position was needed. And looking at it, we didn't feel it was justified with their participant numbers. I also want to note, it's not on this, but I do want to note that their supplies were reduced by 50%. And that was, or I apologize, 20%. And that was due to the request being bunched together and not clarifying what amounts were requested for what items. And this also included a coordinator cell phone, which should be provided by OJD and really can't be covered by CJC funds. All right, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Annie and Connie, but Judge Kitson-McCadish, I wasn't sure if you were about to say something.
I was just trying to catch up with you on the probation officer. The 0.50 you're fine with, but it was the other one. I was looking back on their application?
Yeah, they requested a second one. The way that we denoted it was that it was a new, instead of, and that drop down, it said new instead of existing.
Okay. Okay, all right, that's fine.
Okay, and I think we're all good. All right, Connie, I'm gonna ask that you step away for a moment. But please come back. Don't leave us. Don't leave us forever. All right. The next one is Lincoln County Mental Health Court. In response to feedback, they clarified that the jail is not used for treatment. Jail was only used twice during the 23 to 25 biennium with an average stay of only 3 days. They noted that UAs occur regularly on a set schedule to provide structure and routine for participants. The court does place as much emphasis on incentives as sanctions, and graduation rates are continuously monitored and have increased. Their average participation for Lincoln's mental health court is 14. They have a completion rate of 44%, and their spending is at 67%. Now, I do want to note that staff recommended the rental assistance be cut to reflect the 15 participants served, not the 21, because there was no description of why the participant count would increase this substantially. Also, we did have to, much like in the adult drug court, cut those facility rental fees as those are an unallowable use of CJC grant funds. If you want to see that written out. I also noted supplies. Participant supports were reduced as well to reflect the current participant levels. And any other reductions were using their prioritization sheet. So with that, do we have any other recommendations for Lincoln Mental Health Court? All right. Connie, welcome back. I can't see on this if Joe is back with us or not. Oh, there you are. Welcome back, Joe. Perfect. We're going to welcome you back to ask you to mute and turn your camera off. So for Douglas County Mental Health Court, they clarified that policy meetings are held monthly and staff meetings occur weekly. They noted that broadened incentive options are being provided and outlined their Friends of Treatment Court program that facilitates donations and support from community partners outside of that CJC grant. They're exploring solutions to make sure UA data is entered into SCMS more promptly and clarified that their incentives significantly outweigh their sanctions. They have developed a new database system to better capture and analyze recidivism data to reflect their program's long-term effectiveness. And the team is integrating recovery capital assessment into their phase transition planning. So with that, here is their staff recommended funding. They have average participation of 34, a completion rate of 45%, and spending at 68%. Now, I do want to note, if I may, again, I'll come back to this, that staff reduced their housing by 20% due to the lack of explanation or breakdowns of funds that also occurred in their supplies category. It's just not on here. Everything else that you see beyond the supplies and the housing is due to following their prioritization sheet. Do we have any additional recommendations for Douglas Mental Health Court? All right, I see 2 thumbs up, 3 thumbs up. We'll carry on. All right, next up, we have Tillamook County Mental Health Court. They, in response to feedback, said that they're actively meeting with the OSCA team to learn more about validated screening tools available for mental health courts. They are considering having them completed by community corrections within 2 weeks of intake. They're also having conversations about how to keep risk levels separate, and they're working to make sure their entire team is entering data into SEMS. They're working towards that 4-to-1 incentive to sanction ratio and also working on entering that data into SEMS. They did clarify that their judge meets with participants for a minimum of 5 minutes. The policy committee is working hard to stand up an advisory committee. And they're working with community corrections and Tillamook County Jail to increase weekend and holiday UAs. Finally, they clarified that jail is not used as treatment, but that some participants will go to jail due to violations and are held there until they can be placed in residential treatment. So with that, here's their recommended staff recommendations. Their average participation is 17. They have a completion rate of 58%, and their spending is at 50%. I do want to note, and again, I'll come back to this, I do want to note that staff recommended cutting both the second behavioral health court team member supervision, the backup PO, as well as the PO tech, as participant numbers did not necessitate need for additional PO support. Beyond that, any reductions were cut to their prioritization sheet.
So this one I had marked as a high service cost per participant. You said they have 17 participants?
Correct, their average is 17.
And they've only spent 50% of what they requested last year?
Correct.
Is this a newer court?
I would look to Rachel Mark, who might have that information. To my knowledge, they've been around for a while, but I don't know what
It just
while
seems
is.
like a really high number for that number of participants.
They are relatively new. They are listed in our operating profiles as having been open for 3 to 5 years. I want to say they opened right around COVID time, so probably 2020-ish. So newer.
I might say a greater reduction based on only spending the 50% and the high service cost per participant.
So I will note that they have been reduced right from their initial cap to the scaled cap, but that is taking that 50% into consideration. So that does have the spending piece. However, of course, you can make further reduction recommendations as you see fit. We'll just, again, as mentioned before, need that tied to a reduction if you choose to make it.
I would love to hear somebody else's thoughts because I may be off the mark.
I feel like it's a really high number for the number of participants, but I'm not sure what the recommendation would be.
Well, they put that their participants are 30. And they're only serving 17, and that's under the contract service portion. And then it has, do they have the appropriate justification for Tillamook Family Counseling and the appropriate numbers?
It is
Anticipated
Interesting.
participant number 30.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I found it, so it's interesting because the number Adeline gave us is 17, but their noted average participants last biennium was 28, and their anticipated average is 2 more than that for 30. So it is an interesting, like the 30 to 28 makes sense, but the 17 participants that we have from the SCMS data, right, which is where I think Adeline's getting her numbers, that discrepancy is, that seems like a lot.
So do we want to recommend, like the same way we did the adjustments to the others, down to an appropriate number of participants? I know it's whoever did their applications for grant applications, that was really confusing, as Adeline mentioned before, like which number to use, whether it was all the participants you're going to serve or whether it was the average number. And maybe they took what they would serve in the entire time.
Over the 2 years instead of an
Yeah.
annual.
Yeah.
So then cut the counseling. Would that be all of the things that have the 28 number, or just the Tillamook Family Counseling? Because the UAs is also at 28.
What do you think, Jake?
I'm kind of, can you go back, Adeline, to that other slide that talks about the cuts? Or the reductions? So I'm glad we cut the backup PO position in the PO tech, reduce that funding, because they're asking for 204,000. And in their narrative, they talk about having all those positions, and then they break it out even more. Asking for funding for those specific positions. So $102,000 a year for 70% of someone's time. And then looking at the cost of, or the treatment, we anticipate 30, but we're at 17. And it says average participants served last biennium is 28, but we have 17.
We could also, well, assuming this is okay by the rules, assume some growth in their participant numbers to 20 or 19, and ask for the reduction to that, because based on this slide here, there's already some reduction, so it would be an additional to what, but not the full reduction. I think if I'm doing math right, which is really questionable, I think the reduction would be just a little bit more to get down to those numbers, but I don't know what the actual numbers would be. But I guess the other things that kind of, you know, for me that I consider a court starting during COVID is very hard. It is relatively new. And so, you know, those are always the things that kind of counter some of these, where they're at and where they're growing. I feel like 3 to 5 years in, often courts kind of hit their stride as well. And so I would be inclined to give them a couple more, the anticipated growth. I think we should give a little bit, at least on that front.
So do you want to reduce it to 70% on that 113 on the other sheet? I think you have it at 88% if we reduce that to 70%. That would at least get us to over 20.
So just to be clear, what I'm hearing is a reduction of the clinicians in contractual services to better match the numbers of participants in the treatment court and allow a little bit of room for growth is what I'm hearing. So reduce that down to 70%.
You said that wonderfully.
There's a first time for everything.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, I'm seeing 4 out of 5 head nods. Do we have any additional recommendations beyond that reduction to contractual services or to that clinician line? All right, we're motoring. All right, so next up we have Wasco and Hood River counties, their mental health court. I do want to note this is their first time applying for CJC grant funds, so they are a new court to us. They have updated their policy and procedures manual and participant manual to reflect the Oregon Specialty Court standards. And they have requested best practice training from OSCA that is scheduled for this fall. They've also inquired into recovery capital tools and will implement whichever is recommended by OSCA. They did want to note that their completion rate has grown from 8% in 2023 to 31% in 2024, and mid-2025, so now-ish, it's at 33%. They've created exit interviews for participants to help them reach the national minimum standard of a completion rate of 54% by the end of the year. And I just wanted to note a quote that was in their narrative, and this is a direct quote. Statistically, a 600% progress rate within a 24-month time frame shows significant improvement. So with that, here is staff recommended funding. Now they do have an average participation of 12, a completion rate of 30%, and because they're new to us, we don't have a spending rate. Staff recommended almost full funding with cuts to some supplies. So they're cleaning supplies, first aid, and basic household necessities, as it wasn't explained directly tying to the participants. It was kind of a more general amount. So that's what those cuts look like. Other than that, though, no other reductions were recommended. And I apologize, those were in housing, if I misspoke earlier. All right. Moving on, we have Klamath County Mental Health Court. Again, they noted that Klamath Mental Health Court their whole county restructured the treatment courts a year ago, which included broadening their referral sources. They review eligibility as a team, which has increased participants and decreased, the duration between arraignment and plead-in. They participated in the RANT pilot project and integrated RANT assessments as part of identifying high-risk and high-need participants promptly. They are utilizing their LPSC as the advisory committee. The judge and team review types of incentives and when they were awarded to ensure that they've been awarded in a graduated, consistent, and fair manner. And responses to noncompliance behavior includes assessing for the participant's ability to understand the program's policy and expectations. And then finally, they have updated their participant handbook to outline expectations and requirements. All right, so here's their recommendation. They have an average participation of 35. Their completion rate is 73%, and their spending is 52%. Now, staff did recommend reducing the deputy district attorney to 0.25 FTE to reflect the time spent on participants, so to reflect their participant count. But other than that, any other reductions were based on their prioritization sheet to get to that scaled cap. And I can show you if you want to see the numbers on that deputy DA.
And that coincides with the one from their ADC, right? We also reduced that 25% by that exact number. That's
Yes.
that's what I'm seeing. Yes.
No, in Klamath, I think we decided to go against the recommendation on the ADC side and fund them fully.
And again, I do want to just remind everyone that kind of what we did in the other court is a little bit immaterial. We want to really focus on Klamath Mental Health Court, looking at their participants, looking at their descriptions, that kind of thing.
I was just asking for the deputy district attorney position because
And it looks like the probation officer is a new position. And so what have they been doing? Well, never mind. It doesn't say in the narrative what they were doing previously.
It does not, and but I will note this, that, and I cannot speak for whether or not this happened to them, but I do know there was some misunderstanding. Some folks did new, meaning it's a brand new position to the court in total, but what we were hoping for and what some courts did was this is a new request to CJC funding. So it could have been that they had a PO previously, it's just they're asking for CJC funding. That was the instructions, at least. Again, we don't have enough to say, but.
Now, the narrative seems to imply that they were maybe not monitoring their misdemeanant folks as much, and that this position would be in part to increase monitoring, or have monitoring, I should say, formal monitoring, as opposed to no monitoring for those misdemeanor folks.
And then what was their average number of participants last biennium?
35.
Because I'm seeing under contractual for their special court management system data entry, average anticipated average served in the coming biennium is 101. Average number of participants served last biennium, 101.
I don't know what they put in their narrative, but I know that some folks, especially for things like that, those were typically tied more to an hourly rate or how much time someone was going to spend for putting that data into SCMS. So it might not be tied to the participant numbers of participants as much as tying to an FTE.
Well, I think it's on the contractual part, so it's where everybody put the average. But some people put the whole 24 month cycle of how many people they would see, I think.
Yeah, their narrative talks about each treatment team member or staffing team member entering data into SCMS so the judge can review all the notes prior to walking in the courtroom.
Which I think, if
Okay.
I may, I think is in direct. Maybe not. I thought that they had received feedback that they needed to improve SCMS data. Regardless, it is a standard, right? That data is
Yeah.
entered.
Okay.
All right, so looking at this, do we have any additional recommendations for Klamath Mental Health Court?
No.
All right, no additional recommendations. All right, next up, we have Baker County Mental Health Court. Now, in response to feedback, they are requesting funds to ensure that the minimum of 2 random tests per week. They note that only 36 per year are covered by Medicaid. I think that came up earlier. A coordinator will work with partners on meeting the time standards for UA entry into SCMS. They've updated their eligibility to not deny past or current treatment court participants. They also clarified that validated assessment tools are used. The participants are reassessed throughout the program. Staffing occurs bi-weekly, and they have separated their adult and juvenile dockets. They plan to utilize SCMS to track all incentives, including non-tangible. They've updated their incentive program to include extra recognition for larger milestones and phasing up. They noted that the judge spends approximately 5 minutes with each applicant. They also noted that they're working to schedule an independent evaluation from OSCA in the 25-27 biennium. They have implemented participant surveys and exit surveys, and a member of law enforcement will be joining the mental health court team. So again, lots of changes. Now, this is an implementation court, so they do not have that scaled cap. Staff did note in supplies that movie tickets and bowling, which were their own line items, those are considered entertainment, and those are unallowable under CJC grant funds. And then training and travel was reduced to that 12,000 cap. Oh, and I'm so sorry, I didn't give you pertinent information. The average participation is 12. Their completion rate is 38, and their spending is at 40%. I apologize.
Under supplies, it has gym passes. Is that not considered recreation?
So gym passes, as long as they are either day passes, as long as they're a set amount, not a gym membership, they are allowed as a pro-social activity.
Okay.
We can't have you signing folks up for a membership, right? Because we don't want to get caught in a contract. Because if I know anything, getting out of a gym contract is hard work. Do we have any additional recommendations for Baker Mental Health Court? All right. Now, Your Honor, I am going to ask that you step away from this one. Now, I don't have any additional information in their narrative for this one. However, they did have a lot of information, if I remember correctly, in their budget narratives. So for Lynn Mental Health Court, They have an average participation of 1. It should be noted that they were an implementation court. I should have added that first and foremost. They have an average participation of 1. Their completion rate is 0%, and their spending is at 36%. Now, if I may, I'm going to pop on over and show you some staff recommendations, and then we come back. Staff did recommend cutting the mental health supervisor as it wasn't directly tied to participants, and their explanation didn't provide how they would spend that 0.15 FTE of time accounting for that direct time with participants. In contractual services, staff noted that the unit per month in the equation did not match the narrative. So we reduced the Lynn County Mental Health Treatment Team member to 14 hours to match what was outlined in their narrative. And then for their random UAs, we reduced it to the lowest cost reported by the applicant in the narrative. And then training and travel, although it's not here, was cut to that $12,000 cap. Do we have any additional recommendations for Lynn Mental Health Court? All right, thank you for the thumbs up. I don't want you to feel like I'm rushing you. Judge, you are welcome to come back if you'd like to. Thanks. Next up, we have Crook County Mental Health Court. So they noted that they're going to continue to evaluate eligibility criteria to ensure alignment with best practice standards. And they also noted that they're partnering with their LPSC to stand up an advisory committee. Now, this is another new court. They have not previously received CJC funds for their mental health court. Recommended reductions by staff included, and if I may, I'll go over and then I'll come back. They included a reduction to the probation deputy. We recommended cutting it to 0.75 FTE based on the number of participants served. Their original ask was based on their capacity. Another note for this court, it's not on that additional slide, but in supplies, they requested a cell phone for the coordinator. That should be covered by OJD funding. So we cut that. And we do want to note that their training and travel they requested a little over that 12,000 cap. Staff agreed with that. We agreed that their request was fine. However, we did follow the admin costs reduced. So they did get 100% of that training and travel, even though it's over the $12,000 cap. And I'm sorry, again, the average participation is 4. Their completion rate is 33%, and then they don't have spending reported. All right. Any additional recommendations for Crook Mental Health Court? Annie?
Nope, just did the wrong thing again. I don't
That's
know
all
why.
right.
The React and the Raise are right next to each other. It's
They're very close.
very close. I seem to be
getting
the only
late
one
in the
having
day.
that problem. But
Nah, you're not the first. Probably won't be the last. All right, next up, we have Marion County Mental Health Court. In their narrative, they clarified that all assessments are entered into SCMS for team review. They plan to regularly update case plans in SCMS to better coordinate and deliver proper dosage. They will also emphasize recording incentives to accurately reflect the ratio of incentives to sanctions. They've identified a low barrier shelter for new participants if they don't meet sober living eligibility. This will allow the participant to be released from custody to a safe housing option rather than being potentially released just without a housing option. And they plan to establish an advisory committee that will serve all 5 Marion County treatment courts. So their average participation was 20. Their completion rate was 60%. And their spending at the end of Q7 was at 66%. Now, we did recommend a reduction in the urinalysis substance testing due to the lack of information to support the 154 tests per month. It was kind of unknown why that amount of enhanced tests were necessary for the mental health court. Also, cell phones and phone cards were reduced to the 38 participants that were served last biennium. And then all other reductions were following their prioritization sheet. Any additional recommendations for Marion Mental Health Court? All right, keep on moving. Union County Mental Health Court is next. They wanted it noted that they've requested a program review from OSCA looking for recommendations on eligibility criteria. They are beginning to develop integrated treatment plans to ensure participants receive the proper dosage. They've added a professional counselor to their treatment court team. And they've agreed on a new formal incentive plan that started on July 1st of this year, so just a couple weeks ago. And they are prioritizing standing up an advisory committee. And they did make a note that they tried this last biennium, but were unable to complete that due to shorting staffages. So they're working on that again. Their average participation was 10. Their completion rate was 50%, and their spending was at 49%. Now, we do want to note that we did cut the defense attorney position as it was a placeholder request. I just want to note that the county is still able to make that request in the future if they feel so inclined. They would just do it as a budget adjustment. It would need to be brought before the commission, but it didn't need to remain as a placeholder. They still have that option. And then any other reductions that you see here, we'll move on over there. Those were based on their prioritization sheet. Beyond that $1 that they requested for the defense attorney.
So I just had a quick question.
Sure.
I know we spent a lot of time talking about their UA collection on their drug court. And now we're on the mental health court, 2 separate programs. But the drug court was 220,000. And this is 88,000. So for 8 folks, upwards of 10 UAs. So it's 11 grand per participant on average.
I do want to note they have an average participation of 10.
They have an average participation of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was just looking at the numbers for the anticipation.
Mm-hmm. And I do, again, I want to bring us to, right, we don't want to compare, you know.
I'm not trying to compare. I'm not
they're
trying to
separate.
compare.
Because there are, right, for a mental health court, there's different drug testing types, different drug testing standards, all these different things, right? However, that being said, if you have additional recommendations, as you have had for a few other courts, by all means, we would just need it to a number. Go ahead, Joe.
So a quick question on what you just said for clarification, because maybe that'll help me better understand it. So there's different testing options for mental health court clients versus adult drug court clients.
We're gonna call in Rachel Mark for this.
Saw that one coming. Yeah, so there's a couple of different considerations when we're talking about the mental health court population. I first want to acknowledge we know that lots of them present as co-occurring. So anybody who is in a mental health course with a diagnosed substance use disorder would be tested at the same frequency as anybody in like an adult drug court, for example, that no less than 2 times per week random drug testing. However, not everybody has a diagnosed substance use disorder, so they might not need to be tested as frequently. There is, however, a recommendation to continue some testing just to make sure they don't end up with maladaptive coping mechanisms using drugs to deal with their mental health. So there's some kind of more intermittent. The types of tests themselves can vary because we're looking, oftentimes we're not just looking for the presence of substances like illicit substance use. We're actually also looking to make sure people are taking the right meds to manage their mental health needs. Those are oftentimes more costly and more robust tests.
I would assume as well, Rachel, that depending on the diagnosis, some testing are covered through their insurance and some are not if they have a mental health diagnosis versus not having a substance use disorder.
Yes, so that's a really great point, Judge. If we're talking about somebody who's got no substance use disorder diagnoses, getting any drug tests covered through that umbrella would be substantially more difficult. I would actually defer to Connie if she has anything kind of additional to add on how much mental health providers are testing for the presence of actual medications, but this is where I would flag for you all that we know there's this gap between what's billable, what's covered and deemed as medically necessary for treatment under the insurance umbrella versus what's been proven and researched under the treatment court umbrella that oftentimes is a little more intensive, a little more comprehensive than what we can get paid for through our normal avenues.
Yeah. I struck that on the way home.
As far as testing for levels, it's very limited on how often that occurs and on what medications, because they're looking at therapeutic levels versus treatment courts that are looking to make sure it's being taken consistently. Also, we have had an instance, of a mental health client who did not have substance use, any history of substance use, and therefore we couldn't have her UA through the A&D programs. She had to go to parole and probation, and then none of it's covered by insurance.
Did that answer your question, Joe?
No, just reason being is we collect UAs and we verify medications for folks through that for the very same reasons. So yeah, unless there's some new specific kind of testing, I mean, usually most people collect UAs or oral swabs, and it just matters what panels or what substances you're confirming for. So it just comes back to, for me, we're spending in a small county over $300,000, I think, or something like that for UA testing. And yeah. So I won't recommend this one going forward either. So, but that's just my position. So.
So with all of that information, do you have a recommendation on, and this is for anyone on the GRC, a recommendation on moving forward with Union Mental Health Court? Is there an additional recommendation, or do you want to stick with it?
I felt like it seemed pretty accurate. way it is now.
And what is the majority of the group thinking? We have one leave it, we have one cut it, so we need to hear from our other GRC members.
So I just looked at the narrative and it said, I stopped reading it because I wanted to respond, but it talks about their UA costs being 3 times the amount they were before, that they underspent last year. And, but then something changed. So I don't know if we all want to take a look at their narrative and that might help explain it.
I think that's a great recommendation.
Is there a way that we can possibly approve, like, I don't know if to give direction to say we will approve X% of your request for drug testing, but you must reach out to Rachel Mark to go over the testing policies with her to make sure that they are efficient and economically appropriate. Something to require them to look at their drug policy, get some ideas, or their drug testing, to get some ideas about how to be more efficient. And then if they do that and they're where they're at, they get the additional portion.
So are you saying provisional funding with the
Yes.
provision being that they need to work with Rachel Mark / Oscar on making sure that they're efficient? Let me go ahead, Rachel, and speak to that, and let me find out what that, usually a provisional fund needs to be tied to a standard. It needs to be tied to something measurable. So go ahead, Rachel, say what you were going to say, and then we'll work on answering your question, Judge, in the background.
I love a creative solution, Judge Kitson-McCottish. Thank you for the idea. And I think I would just flag this program had already identified interest in working with OSCA. So I think we would be more than happy, willing, capable to do whatever else they requested or needed. I would say, generally speaking, any programs that need some type of support and reach out and ask for us, we're willing to develop technical assistance plans. So we're definitely a resource. That being said, totally deferring to you, Adeline, for CJC and kind of how this relates to the overall grant award decision-making process. But yes, we are a resource, and it would be the entire OSCA team because there's so many brilliant brains that could be helping our programs operate.
I think we are moving this up the chain a little bit. So if it's all right, well, before, let's see if do we have kind of a consensus? Is that something everyone would be interested in? Some like provisional funding for, and you're saying specifically for your analysis for drug testing? Is that right? Okay. Is that something the group as a whole would be into? Or is that something, like, I would just want to make sure that is that something that we should research further before we go too deep?
I'm for it. How about you guys? Annie, weigh in, Connie?
Yeah, I'm interested in the information.
Okay.
Adeline, this is Rachel again.
Hi, Rachel.
Can I break in real fast? Sorry.
You can.
I didn't catch the last part of what y'all talked about because I just wanted to make sure what was allowable and what's not allowable, but in order to put them on provisional or probation, it's got to be based on performance standards. So it's got to be based on their performance. It cannot be based on what they're asking or what they're requesting for funds. So you can reduce or you cannot fund based on their request, but a provisional status has to be based on performance. So I hope that clarifies this conversation.
So what would the performance be? Reducing their cost of UAs?
It has to
Rachel?
be based on the performance measures of the court themselves. And so if you're asking about something about a funding request, that's not a performance measure. You are
So-
able to reduce or not fund, make those recommendations, but the provisional has to be based on a performance measure for the court, which isn't in this particular table.
So would a performance measure be like, a performance measure would be to meet the best standard, the best practices regarding drug testing. So if they're currently only testing once a week, it would be, you need to be now testing twice a week. It couldn't be something of, you need to be more efficient or economic. Is that right, Rachel?
Yes, that's correct.
So with that additional information, would either A, is there a measurement that we want to try and do provisional funding tied to, or do we want to leave it as is, or is there another reduction that you would want to do going forward?
If we reduced it now and they then decided to work with Rachel or Oscar on their own and came back for a request later, was that
Like in a
something-
supplemental round per se? Is that kind of what you're talking about? That would be something feasible that could be done. They could absolutely come back with a supplemental round. And this is true for all regardless. If a CJC, the GRC does recommend a supplemental round and it does go forward, the courts would have the opportunity, much like the application was now, for this funding, they would have the opportunity to showcase, here's what we've done and here's why we need additional funding. So that would be regardless whether it was for UAs, whether it was for personnel, whatever, that isn't court specific or request specific, that we would want them to tell us, hey, here's what we've been doing and here's why we need additional funding.
Elaine, if there's someone on the line from Union County, are we able to ask them specific pointed questions?
We actually can't do that. So unfortunately, the only people that can speak are the GRC or staff. We're not able to request additional information at this point.
Okay.
So what's the amount that we're looking at? Is it the 88,000, the assured drug detection, which is 88,000?
320.
Okay, and it's at 90%. So, and I get Joe doesn't want to fund any of it, and I understand that. I want to fund some of it. And I want them to clarify, get Oscar's help and then come back. But they have 10 people. And it's currently 11,000 per person for their drug testing. I would do 60%.
So again, I'm gonna just repeat it back to make sure we've got it clear. So you're saying a further reduction to 60% of the assured drug detection line to match their average participation, or
Yes.
to better reflect their average participation.
Yes.
Okay. How does the rest of the GRC feel about that? Do we have a majority that agrees with that? Can we get some thumbs or some nods, or I know we have one in the judge. So for the rest of the GRC, is that what you want to go forward with?
And if not, put something else out there, because I can be convinced.
I think my concern with taking it down to 60% is that they might not have enough funds to be able to provide the amount of drug testing that they need to do. Would you be willing to consider 70%?
Jake or Annie, what are you thinking?
Well, we have 3 different UA ranges. It ranges from $26 up to $49. And then another 40 to 60 for confirmations. I mean, I don't want to compare apples to oranges, but the cost of my UAs are nothing near that. Nothing.
Oh.
They're so far down the pecking order. I think we spend $31 total.